Of course, that pause of Confederate troops gives the Union forces to the north time to do what? Regroup, find their way back into their own regiments and brigades. The Union officers and NCOs did a pretty good job of getting the 19th Corps, the 8th Corps, the 6th Corps, and the cavalry back in their proper regiments and brigades. All right, so the Confederates advance north. Okay, here's the cemetery, guys, down to our south that way. Confederates advance north to roughly the Miller House line, right along this line here. Union forces are gathering about a mile and a half to the north. All right, about 10:30, 10:45. Guess who has not been here through most of the battle? General Philip Sheridan, Union commander. He, after coming back from Washington, D.C., spent the night in Winchester. He hears about the battle raging to the south. He gets on his big black horse Rienzi, rides south from Winchester, and rides among his rallying troops north of here. All right? What he decides to do is this. He decides, well, he tells his men that we're going to win the battle yet. Stick with me. We're going to sleep in our own camps tonight. Okay? And what he does, instead of attacking right away, he decides that he is going to get everybody back in their proper regiments and brigades, and he is going to realign his forces somewhat. Okay? So what he does is this. He's got his 6th Corps to the north, he's got his 19th Corps, and he's got all his cavalry over there just on the other side of the Valley Turnpike, which is just over the hill here about a quarter mile. Okay? He decides that he's going to leave Merritt's cavalry division over there on the Union left flank. And remember, Sheridan loves the cavalry. And he decides to take George Armstrong Custer's division and bring them all the way back. All right? To the far right flank out yonder there, about 2 miles. Because he wants his infantry in the middle as a bludgeoning force, and then bring his cavalry in around the flanks. Pretty good idea. And he had used that tactic in other battles prior, so he was very confident in that tactic, and he loved the cavalry. Okay, and was very confident in the cavalry. So about 4 p.m., there had been some skirmishing and probing and poking and prodding in here, folks, for several hours. But by 4 p.m., Sheridan was ready to launch his counterattack, and he sends his infantry in, crashing against the Confederate infantry right along this line. And what happened? I'm not telling you. Okay? All right? I will say that there's a stalemate. The Confederates hold along this line very nicely. Okay? There's a stalemate. But Sheridan has more men, more firepower, better horses, and he sends in his cavalry eventually under George Custer, who I'm sure you've all heard of, and Wesley Merritt around his left flank.
When you read the 6th Corps description of the battle, of course, he's the 6th Corps commander, and they say, hey, you know, Wright had this thing locked down. He got us all formed in here. It was the 19th Corps that was running, and, you know, they didn't show up until Sheridan did. Here is General Getty's division, which was the division that fought in the cemetery. So they're sort of the last organized and formed Union division. They're anchored on the turnpike, and we got the rest of the 6th Corps in on this line here, and then the 19th Corps is forming on the farther end. Those poor guys in the 8th Corps that were scared out of their tents earlier in the morning, those guys are up sort of at that way station that we saw on the highway under Rutherford B. Hayes is forming those guys up. Those guys really are not going to be part of the counterattack because, again, they left their tents in their pajamas without their guns and packs and stuff. So one of the cool things that I like to read about here is the way that the U.S. troops are reforming, reorganizing. The first thing that a bunch of the guys write about is that they throw together some breastworks. So they feel like they're sort of making a little home here. They're not really going to retreat any farther. In a few minutes, the men had thrown together a low, rough breastworks of stones, logs, and rails, and filled their boxes with fresh ammunition, ready for their next set of orders. The regimental and brigade flags were set up as beacons to direct each man how to steer through the mob, and in a very few minutes, there was an effective line of battle established. Okay. So now we got ammunition and breastworks. What else do we need? We need lunch. We need coffee. Again, for these guys that were scared out of their tents early in the morning. For most of the men, hunger was uppermost, and some munched bread and meat from their haversacks, and others waited to make coffee. Many threw themselves upon the ground where they stood and fell asleep. Since our breakfast had been very early and very hasty, we now advanced the dinner hour, made coffee, and soon felt refreshed and ready for anything. The prospect of a good cup of coffee was exhilarating, and at 3 o'clock, when every man had a good square meal, which is the first prerequisite to good square fighting, we were ready to advance. Now, some of the Confederates talk about going to sleep as well, but they really write from a memory of exhaustion, and I got into battle and I just passed out asleep, whereas these guys, everybody's writing in hindsight, talk about how refreshed I was with my coffee and was ready to attack. So again, I think you get some different feelings. Now, as Sheridan's here, he's sorting everybody out. We realize that Longstreet's not coming, so he says, hey, we'll dig in a little bit, we'll get that ammunition. The Confederate line is going to move into that position that we talked about somewhere between noon and 1. Early was hoping that was going to be a full-on attack against this line, but it really just petered out and didn't get very far at all. So Sheridan sort of takes that as like, hey, if that was the last big Confederate attack, I think we're going to be good. Sheridan says, this repulse of the Confederates made me feel pretty safe, and I decided to suspend the fighting till my thin ranks were strengthened by the men coming up from the rear. So again, he knows he's got some time. The Confederate threat has sort of dissipated, and he's going to wait and get all of his troops sorted out. I think that's one difference between Sheridan and Wright, is that Wright was probably thinking about counterattacking a little earlier without waiting, again, maybe to flush everybody out or everybody to get their naps in. So. So what we've got here, we had Gordon's troops out on the far end. Right here we've got General Ramser's division. In between here and Gordon is General Kershaw's troops. And then sort of angled back behind Ramser is the Confederate divisions of General Pegram. Now, according to Gordon, again, who's commanding out of the end, he says Sheridan's movements were clearly seen by our vigilant signal troops on top of Massanutten Mountain, and their flags waved left and right and signaled us the news: the Yankees are halting and reforming. So we do have some tactical signaling going on between here and the mountain. I think that's actually pretty cool. Sheridan's plan is that he's going to sweep out with his western flank, push the Confederates back, and if he can sort of push the Confederates off the road that way, that'll keep them from retreating, being able to retreat down south. Unfortunately, that's not what happens. Out on the end, General Evans, who's fighting a brigade under Gordon, is able to counterattack on the 19th Corps and sort of put a hurt out on this end, whereas again those Vermonters and troops under General Getty were able to make more progress in on this side. Problem is that doesn't last very long. Of course, the Union guys are pretty overwhelming in numbers against the Confederate position. and are being able to get around Gordon's flank and roll it up in that direction. So Gordon had gone back to talk to Early. He says, hey, I need some more troops. Again, the signal flag guys are telling me that Sheridan's coming in on my flank. Early says, you can have a couple artillery pieces, but you know, that's all I've got. Probably a fair statement. He could have maybe brought some more guys over from that side, but at this point, you know, the attack's coming in. It's pretty late for that. Gordon says, I reached my command only in time to find the unresisted columns of Sheridan rushing through. Union forces were assailing our main line on the flank and rolling it up like a scroll, regiment after regiment, brigade after brigade, and in rapid succession we were crushed. So way out on that end of the line, you got the Louisiana Brigade, Stonewall Brigade. You got troops under Joe Kershaw here, Georgia, South Carolina, Mississippi troops. And then in this area, under General Ramsey, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and then some more North Carolinians down that way. Let's see. Some quotes from the Union guys attacking here. They say, directly in front of our division stood a brick mill, from the windows of which the rebel sharpshooters picked off our men. The Confederate infantry, strongly posted behind stone walls, extended across.
Is this considered a mill?
This is the house. I think that we're not 100% sure where the mill was. If it's that, if it's across the street.
Where's the water?
Yeah, where's the water course?
Meadowbrook is right down there.
Right there. Yeah.
But there's also rumor that there's like a spring up here that may be going down that way and is feeding it that direction. So, not exactly sure. Not exactly sure what was powering what at the time. Let's see. And there's a stone mill at the crossing of the road in the brook. That's an obstacle for the Union. There, which again is where Custer would have been coming down through there. Out where we turned, there was a little church down there. If you kept going on that road, there's a ford down there, and again, that's where Custer would have crossed Cedar Creek, which we'll come to that a little bit later in our story, but that's where that's going to happen. Talking to some of the guys here about the Confederate retreat. So this is from a guy, 61st Georgia. He's out in Evans Brigade. So again, those are the guys out holding Gordon's left. He said they could see the Yankees advancing and our men falling back. They retreated faster, and they began to run. The General Evans ordered us to fall back, which we did for nearly a mile, but then we were ordered to double quick as other men were so far ahead of us and their officers had lost all control. To tell the truth, it all turned into a panic. The gallant Generals Gordon and Evans were showing all personal bravery mortal men could do. Every man would stop, face the enemy, shoot at them, but the rest of the line was running as fast as a herd of wild and stampeded cattle. So I was thinking on the way between the last stop on your question about just sort of the timing and what's going on, and that's a good question. And I guess the worst answer is I don't know, because it's hard to piece together some of those stories of, when did this happen versus what these guys are doing, what time is going on. I'm going to bet if you're under fire and realize the rest of the Army's left you, what you think is an hour and a half probably isn't a very accurate measure of time. The other folks I want to talk about, we got Pegram's division, and I don't think anybody really knows a whole lot about Pegram's division. They're sort of in a reserve line in Middletown. So that, again, Early probably should have had those guys up in the front line. But those guys are going to wind up being the rear guard for a lot of Early's army. Our brigade started to run, but General Pegram rode up and ordered us back where we were. We moved back in good order, even keeping in marching step, and we kept up a continual fire until we crossed Cedar Creek. Another guy says, they marched in line of battle from Middletown to Cedar Creek, and Early personally ordered that division to retreat with good order and alignment. Another part of that brigade says that they were the only ones that could be distinguished as a unit on the fields of panic because they held their organization in good order just before nightfall. So again, you got one division of Confederates that at least they remember themselves marching back down the road through these fields here in good order, stopping to fire every now and then, and trying to hold back the troops. As part of the retreat, there are some Confederates that attempt to get into the trenches and use them against the U.S. troops. Some of the Mississippi guys say, I halted my squad and placed them in the Federal breastworks. I hoped that there had been enough guys to rally around me to prevent the enemy from crossing. When he hears that Custer's crossing the creek behind him, then he says, you know, we're going to go ahead and retreat out of there. And I thought, well, maybe that's just, you know, one Confederate guy, like, thinking he's trying to save the day. But then there's reports from the Union cavalry that says the lines of the enemy came to rest in our old breastworks on the north bank of Cedar Creek, and the order was given to charge. But before we could do that, Custer and the rest of the cavalry crossed the creek and got around behind him. And so historic turnpike bridge back from the 1800s. There's a matching abutment on the other side. You can see it depending on how the light is through the trees. And please don't anybody fall off.
Was this a ford or a bridge was built?
This was a bridge.
A wood bridge.
Yes, wooden back in the day, and I got some bridge pictures.
Yeah.
Across the creek is what would be Stickley's Mill, which is the main Confederate hospital on the south side of Cedar Creek. In the morning portion of the attack, General Wharton's division and the Confederate artillery has massed over there because they need Kershaw and Gordon to clear the Federal troops away from the bridge so they could bring the artillery across and get into combat. This is also where the Confederates throughout the day have been mustering all of the prisoners they've been taken. And so one of the guys here says, I was put into line with 500 or 600 other prisoners. We stood in a long line, and the Confederates took his overcoat, blanket, wool blanket, rubber blanket, all of his money, and his pocket knife. So most of us began the day's work without breakfast, and we were pretty exhausted by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But then the order came in to start marching across the bridge and head south. 6:30 at night, and it's fixing to get dark. And so we're really talking about Confederate retreat from this point on. So now that General Ramseur has been wounded, the guy commanding his division, Brian Grimes, he says on the south side of Cedar Creek, I got about 200 men from my brigade formed up near Hubbs Hill, but as more stragglers came running through, they cried the cavalry across the creek, and these guys scattered and could not be kept together. Colonel DuPont, who's commanding some of the artillery, the Union artillery, puts in 2 batteries on the hill near Cedar Creek. He says, from here I could overlook the disorganized Confederates in full retreat, and I opened fire. I put 5 rifled guns directing shots towards the head of the column, and then my 4 12-pound cannons firing in the rear. And so he's really, got that mob of Confederates bracketed. He says evidence of complete demoralization could be plainly seen, and the retreating enemy is off the road and scattering across all the fields here.
Thank you for watching our video. Please remember to like, share, leave a comment, and subscribe. It really helps us grow the channel. Also, if you're looking for more history-related content, then we invite you to head over to our website, americasbesthistory.com. There you'll find hundreds of well-researched articles on a plethora of topics ranging in dates from 1491 to the present day. We upload new articles weekly. Hope to see you there.